a small number of studies, I don't even know if it's more than two or three, that have shown that GLP-1s have a positive effect on gut microbial health. I don't remember. I would have to pull this out. Was this done at a stage where that person had already lost, 20 or 25 pounds and no longer wasn't the state of metabolic syndrome? Or was this actually the pharmacological effect of these GLP-1s? It's a very interesting class of drugs. When I started my career long time ago, feel embarrassed to even say how long,
Welcome to another special episode today of Wellness at the Speed of Light podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Stefanos Sinakropi, and I have the privilege of having one of the most renowned gastroenterologists in the world. He is also a hardcore, let's call him a neuroscientist, knows so much about the brain and the gut-brain axis. Dr. Emeran Mayer, to the program today. I've been trying to get him on the show for a long time. He makes a lot of appearances. His name it pops up everywhere. I've had the chance to read, the two earlier books, the Mind-Gut Connection and the Gut-Immune Connection, and it's just brilliant. And I encourage the audience, everybody, to go out and get those. He has recently published the Debating the Carnivore Diet. He's a co-author on that one. That one is something we'll talk about a little bit as well today. And so on that note, welcome to the program today. And I'd love to get my audience to become experts in this hour or so that we spend together on the microbiome. Thank you for coming today.
Yes, Stefano, thanks for inviting me and also for the kind words. So looking forward to this conversation.
Well, this is fantastic. So I'm going to start really basic. A lot of people, like especially our lay audience, they might have casually heard, microbiome, the word microbiome or something like that. And people definitely know probiotics, right? People say, take probiotics for this, take probiotics for that. And that is a crazy, thing I want to talk about because there's so many choices on probiotics and people just take random stuff. And I don't know if they're even getting benefit from it. But why should people care so much about the health of their microbiome? And how does it just affect everything else?
So a simple reason why they should take care of the microbiome, because if you lead a lifestyle and eat a diet that's optimal for your microbiome, then that is an optimal diet for your health as well. So it makes it very easy. One of the reasons for that is the microbes and the microbes living in our gut. This ecosystem has been around in animals for hundreds of millions, billions of years. It's been one of the most conserved features of evolution in animals. So there must be a significant benefit. And these microbes know a lot. They've been around longer than all of us. They've been around in the oceans of the planet for billions of years. And they've accumulated a lot of knowledge in terms of interacting with the environment and interacting with each other. So this is why the microbiome is so important. I always emphasize that it's the wisdom that they have accumulated and stored in their hundreds of millions of genes. And secondly, it makes it easy the choice of our lifestyle, because if you look what's good for the microbial diversity and richness and health of this ecosystem inside of us is optimal for us. And we've really neglected this with our modern lifestyles and particularly the modern diet.
That's a good way to start. And so when you talk about microbial diversity, can you just kind of you go into that a little bit? We talk about good bacteria and bad bacteria, but talk more broadly about diversity and why that is so important for us and for our health.
Well, this question always comes up is, what is a healthy microbiome? And we don't have a specific answer for the microbiome, but it's the general answer for any ecosystem, that diversity and richness are the two. So Doesn't matter if this is a city or if this is any other biological system or social system. Diversity will always increase resilience, resistance, and health of the overall organism. So, I mean, the question about the healthy microbiome always comes up. And is there one healthy microbiome? And is there one thing that we can do to achieve that goal? I think it should be oriented on that. The more diverse players you have in one of these systems, the more interactions happened. And there's a field like systems biology that sort of explains many. It's sort of becoming popular within science, not so much in medicine yet. In medicine, we're still sticking for the old-fashioned linear understanding of
Yes.
systems. But if you have this community of participants that are dependent on each other, some creating redundancies. So if it's not that if you kill off one of these members that the system collapses, there's others, and the arrangements between the participating microbes will change if a couple of them die off or are added to it. But overall, this is clearly something that I think we have to take from systems biology and ecosystems understanding that this nurturing this diversity and richness is a key advantage. And so there's, just looking at the numbers, there's about 40 trillion of these microbes. The majority, not all of them, the majority in the colon, in the large intestine. They have millions of genes compared to our 20,000 human genes. I always look at this as it's their database, their vast database from experiences over billions of years. And it makes them probably the ultimate survivors. No matter what happens to this planet, climate change, nuclear war, the microbes will always stay because of this property of now in our gut, they're also very resilient. Like you can eat a variety of different diets and not have any health consequences. You can switch the diets from one day to the other, and you're not going to get sick. We're ingesting a lot of chemicals and medications, which they're able to process and break down. And all of these interventions that can happen to our microbiome does not destroy it. There's very few things. There's a condition called C. difficile colitis that some people develop with in response to an antibiotic. But the risk factors for this, and in general, if you start out with a healthy microbiome, which is shaped early on in life, then it's very rare that it is destroyed or compromised in a way that produces major diseases. With many of these diseases that an altered microbiome is associated with today, so we can hear about it in psychiatry, in obesity, in metabolic diseases. In many of these situations, we just know the associations that people that have any of these health problems, they also have a compromised microbiome. We don't know direct causality in humans. It's very difficult to study that. We know it from animal experiments. And just give you some idea also about, so these 40 trillion of microbial species, the number gets even higher if you get down to the strain level. So each species has multiple strains. And so if you take it E. coli, for example, the bacteria, it goes from a health promoting strain to a deadly strain. So the diversity goes even further up, with taking in the strain composition. It's an amazing system that we have, and it's amazing that we have been able to get away in medicine and science for so long without acknowledging it or recognizing the relevance.
No, I mean, I think it's super important for me as a physician. My story is I've been practicing spine surgery now for almost 20 years, but over the last, couple years, I've in addition to that are doing a lot of integrative health and had really gotten in. And honestly, reading your books really kind of spurred me toward that, because we don't think about that enough as physicians. Because honestly, you said it right there, like just the way that potentially drugs are going to interact based on somebody's microbiome, or thinking about pre-surgical situations, post-surgical recoveries. I mean, we could get into the whole weeds, on the microbiome, and how, how much it affects everything else. But I think that, going back to that first question, that's amazing. There's so much variability. These things live with us. And it's interesting how, like, even mitochondria, right? We have symbiotic relationships with everything. The mitochondria are inside of our cells, but they're an ancient organism as well that then we kind of swallowed and are in our things. And so it's interesting how we have all these things going on, and they're so not, it's hard to study them because there's so many of these things, but it all goes back to how it affects our minds and our physical bodies. Just fascinating, really fascinating.
Yeah, and I mean, there was this initial. I mean, I personally was a skeptic. I've studied brain-gut interactions for a long time. So when the first microbiome studies came out about 10 years ago about microbiome brain communication,
Right.
I was very skeptical because I thought we know enough about just the brain and the gut, the interactions, which were also not really general knowledge amongst physicians. It's kind of amazing to realize of how many different functions the microbes can influence. And yeah, so the intriguing thing is we only know a very small part of it.
Yes.
We know there's unfortunately this whole field now, the social media arena with self-appointed experts, and which has really been damaging to this field tremendously.
Yes.
Because opinions are publicized without the evidence behind them, and in general, the motivation is commercial. People want to sell a product, want to sell a probiotic, want to sell a supplement, want to sell microbiome tests. So this is unfortunate, and for the consumer who is more and more dependent or, influenced by social media messages, it makes it difficult to discern what's real and what's evidence and what is just somebody's smart idea to make money.
I talk about it all the time. In fact, we just finished the manuscript to my first book, which is going to come out here in this. And it talks about my transition from kind of being siloed as a spine surgeon to just trying to really understand what's our healthcare system. Why are we in such a mess with the chronic disease crisis? All these other things. And it's just fascinating how that plays into chronic disease. And we'll talk about that in a second, but you hit it right on. We want people to be the CEOs of their own health. That's something we talk about. That's one of the taglines in the book that I got from a good friend of mine, Margaret. However, they're bombarded with the social media experts. And I've made all these posts on social media. A lot is, the GLP-1s. I have some questions for you on the GLP-1s, but people are literally going to like hairstylists on social media to figure out what to do for their complications when they have gastroparesis on GLP-1s. And these people, everyone's an expert on social media, and it starts becoming the Wild West. And people are trying to sell you stuff like on the probiotic thing. I see it. I follow a lot of scientists on my feed. Anything that's science, I love following it. And I'm always, I'm on, especially on Twitter, because I get you can get really good information, you could get bad information, but in between, great people are, posting great articles on microbiome and other stuff. And then somebody is telling me, if you take this one supplement, it's going to change your whole life. You don't have to do anything else. And they're just shilling for that one supplement. And I absolutely agree. It hurts. It hurts like really strongly. And we could literally do an entire episode about the dangers of social media and what it's doing. And people need to rely on experts such as yourself. Like for me, if I have questions on the microbiome, that's why it's exciting to have you on. And I have some really specific questions because there's some things out there that people need to know, but not rely on some random person who's a self-described expert, because maybe they read your book and then they mixed it with something else, and that who knows. But we really need people that are dedicating their lives to doing this, that then want to pass that information out. So I caution people on that. The other thing that's awesome about what you say, I love this quote by Einstein, and you hit it right on. It's like the more we know, the more we realize how much we don't know. And I think that's what you're trying to say with the microbiome. Same thing with like the brain, like the whole brain thing. Like the more you learn, it's oh my God, there's this whole other world, out there. Same thing with mitochondria and how they work, and on and on. So it's fascinating. So somebody like yourself that says that.
Think about it. I mean, just going back 10 years, and definitely 20 or 25 years, how our concepts of the brain have changed based on an amazing body of science, and with the brain, there's actually less room. So people, I think, stay away. A lot of these influencers say, oh, it's too complicated. For them, it's much easier to talk about diet and
Of course,
and microbiome generalities. But if you just think about how dramatic the changes have been that we learned about the brain. So now you look at the microbiome, and we're just at the beginning of that. Certainly the gut microbiome brain interaction goes at the very beginning, and just imagine in 10, 20 years how this field will evolve, what it will evolve to. I mean, the fastest thing right now that we see in science that's evolving is obviously AI. That's moving at lightning speed. I've never seen anything like this before. And that has the potential of totally changing the world. I think in the biological sciences, it moves pretty fast forward with investments that are made, but to come back to this warning, it's a field that's a nourishing ground for uninformed influencers and pseudo experts that make a lot of money in it. I mean, that's the thing; it's lucrative.
No, it's very lucrative because again, it plays into our society. Where one of the reasons I think it's really lucrative, the whole thing, is because in our society, we've all been brainwashed. We can fix everything with a pill. People love that. So that's low hanging fruit because our brains are wired since we're little kids, right? Your parents or everybody, like in the West, we can fix it with a pill or a procedure.
Yeah.
Not, like some advanced diet or studying all this. Like, oh no, you just take this pill and your microbiome is going to be perfect. It's going to be happy and singing and everything, all your depression's going to go away because you take this one by phyto species or something like that. I see it all the time on the chronic health issue. And I want to talk about the whole serotonin production in the gut and all that. So just so our audience knows exactly why it's so important. But before we get to that, my favorite topic is this chronic disease crisis that we have going on in not just in the United States, but in westernized nations, period. I mean, it's very bad. And so I've been giving a lot of lectures on this. And we just talk about how, despite the fact that we here in this country, we spend more than anybody in the world per capita, $4.4 trillion system of mostly people being sick. And a lot of these are, gut diseases too, and brain diseases. It all goes together. The thing is, something is wrong. Something is wrong. And we know it's the food, it's the exposure to toxins, that we can go on and on and on. What is your thought on how important that gut-brain axis is, or the microbiome, in really feeding into how severe our chronic disease crisis is? Because it is so bad. I jump up and down, and sometimes even some of my colleagues, they're just like, why do you even care? Just do what you do. Just, fix somebody's spine and don't worry about it. And I know you see that because this is what stuff you talk about. But how important is the microbiome and the gut brain axis, do you think, in really feeding into almost all of these chronic diseases that we are seeing on the rise?
Yeah. So before I answer that question, just wanted to add to the $4.4 billion of healthcare expenditures, which the U.S. is leading the world. the amazing thing is if you look at it, there's a graph that I have somewhere in terms of longevity or health measures. We're down somewhere like 28 or something, or 30, which is absolutely amazing. So yes, a lot of people in this country or a selected group of people benefit from that money, but the majority does not, So um, it's going to be very interesting, what will happen with the new administration and somebody like RFK. This is an interesting show that.
It's the most. Listen, we live in amazing times right now. I've never seen anything like it. It's going to be interesting to see. Listen, the confluence. Look at what's happening in politics. The speed of AI. Right, we're putting everything on the blockchain with crypto, whatever. I tell my kids, I'm like, what a great time to be alive. If I could trade places with them, they're going to see robotics.
Yeah.
Right? Personalized medicine. We could go on and what an incredible time to be alive. The fastest change in the history of humanity is happening right in front of us right
Yeah,
now.
it is a quantum leap in evolution, and both biological, social, and political. Yeah. Anyway, so to come back to your question, what role does the alterations in the brain gut or just in the gut microbiome interactions play in this chronic, what I call chronic non-contagious disease epidemic that we're in? And that epidemic, for people that have not thought about it, includes a wide range of disorders and diseases from colon cancer to Parkinson's, Alzheimer's disease, diabetes, many other diseases. So, and I kind of, as a scientist, a lifelong scientist, kind of am always skeptical of these global explanations. It's kind of like the string theory of biology. You could say, this is it, because there's many other factors that play a role in it. But because the brain gut microbiome system is such a key homeostatic organ that links us both to the environment in terms of what we eat and what we consume and the toxins we ingest, and in terms of the sensory stimuli that we get through the brain. All of this, because the way it's engineered, converges on the gut. And the gut is this unusual place because it's not just a digestive organ. It's it's a complex, I call it the gut connectome, which has the majority, 70% of our immune system in it, which has 150 million nerve cells in it, little brain of the gut, enteric nervous system. It has the largest number of endocrine cells in it. And all these cells are in very close proximity within microns of each other. And the microbes have the ability to communicate with that complex system. So that makes it different from other organs, from the heart or even from the lung. And even though I'm a gastroenterologist, I'm not biased because of that. I'm biased because it's just so amazing that a system like that is inside of us, and we typically don't even think about all the ramifications. And so the changes that have been happening that are underlying this, probably the main change that's happening underlying this chronic disease epidemic, is this low-grade immune activation, this low-grade inflammation that starts in the gut when the microbes come into too close contact with the sensors of the immune system that sort of stick out into the gut, these dendritic cells. And that happens when the barrier between the microbes and the immune cells is compromised, because microbes that produce the mucus, which is one big insulating layer, is compromised because of an unhealthy diet. So once that process starts, so you get now the alarm bells ring in the immune system because the sensors recognize they come too close to the microbes, but it doesn't stay in the gut. It can either the cytokines that are produced because of this immune system activation get into the systemic circulation, or some of these dendritic cells, these sensors, there's a migratory component, could go to the fat tissue. Now, all of a sudden, the fat tissue develops the same ability of becoming an inflammatory organ.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, these immune mediators, like cytokines, and another component are these membrane components of microbes that are recognized by immune cells. Once they get into the systemic circulation, they can also get into the brain. They can transfer the blood-brain barrier, get into the brain, and then activate immune cells in the brain, glial cells. So that's one explanation why, for example, an unhealthy gut microbiome system is a risk factor for early cognitive decline and Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's disease. And I always want to emphasize that they're not the cause. I think all of these diseases have multiple causes. That's where systems biology comes in. Our disease model that works really well for your specialty, there's one mechanical thing wrong, and you can go after that and fix it, and it's taken care of. With the chronic diseases, this is not the case. You have these multiple influences. In a mouse model, you can control all these other influences. In a human body, you can't. So when you do studies in humans, many of these mouse findings cannot translate because in humans you have 100 factors that contribute to it. But the microbiome immune interaction is a key factor in it. And it probably drives the fact that these diseases continue to increase in numbers. The mortality has gone down because medicine and pharmaceutical industry has been extremely successful in developing medications to keep people from dying and making a lot of money with it. But we've not solved the underlying problem. And I have to say, I'm personally not a friend of the new administration and the kind of things that come in. But I have to say, this term MEHA, Make America Healthy Again, is a great slogan.
And no matter what side of the aisle you're on, how you don't like that, I have no idea. We want to get healthy. We want to get rid of these toxins and we're listening either on my podcast and my book everywhere. I'm just very frank. I'm like, we are poisoning ourselves. We're poisoning our children. We're ruining our own health by what we're taking in. We didn't even get into the microplastics. I actually have a question about about that. But no, I think that's exactly, right. You're stimulating this low grade immune response. And, and I've talked to many people. I mean, it's just that chronic inflammation is the root of so many of these chronic diseases. But if so, for people to understand, then you've talked about this quite a bit. For example, in patients that became sick with COVID, right? That immune response was crazy if you had an unhealthy microbiome, right? Those people did worse. And then we know about the whole obesity and release of interleukin-6 and all that. I mean, it's well studied now. But imagine that on just a smaller level, a micro level. Every time you're ingesting these horrible processed foods and stuff, you're constantly in that low-grade inflammation. Then it's getting into the brain, it's getting into other parts of the body, and it does damage. Right? It contributes to pretty much every chronic disease and a lot of psychiatric disorders as well.
Yeah. And I mean, so you mentioned the microplastic, that's sort of another thing that has not really fully reached the public consciousness, even though now, people have found microplastic in coronary blood vessels, in humans and in other organs. This is a time bomb. And, once this became public, really nothing has changed. Like there's all this lip service of companies. They want to limit or to decrease the use of plastic. I mean, particularly if you're like plant-based food, which I recommend. But when you buy it at Whole Foods, for example, it's always in plastic boxes. The amount of plastic in our household that we accumulate just with buying healthy foods is amazing. And this whole recycling myth, it's a myth. It's most of this stuff is not being recycled, and it enters the circular economy of our health. And there is a solution from the microbial side. There's microbes that have the ability, have the enzymes to break down microplastic into CO2 and carbon dioxide and water. And so some of these microbes, these chemical specialists are used like in the, or were active in the Gulf of Mexico oil spill, uh, Gulf of America, I should say now.
You think, this is great.
And so they have abilities that you can, so we don't have those chemical magicians in our gut yet, but we can, this is the second or third generation probiotic revolution. We
Mm,
can engineer them, our regular microbes, to do that. They have the ability, you just have to make minor modifications. So there is a possibility to actually solve this problem with the microbiome science. And I bet my money on it, you'll see this in the next 5 years, um, becoming, public, that companies are working on this concept. And then there maybe many other applications, therapeutic applications, where you take the wisdom of the microbiome and the way they, their genes that they have, they may be latent, so you make sure that they get expressed in a certain condition, like, for example, during inflammation.
mhm.
That's another indication of these kind of microbes, the second generation microbes, probiotics, that they get activated if there's inflammation somewhere in the gut and become particularly active, like in an inflamed bowel. So there's many of these amazing things that will come down the pipeline. And I would say it's all based on this tremendous database that this microbiome has, um, and it may not be expressed in our gut at the moment, but it's expressed in the oceans or somewhere.
Interesting.
So it's not too far-fetched to be able to transplant some of these microbes that can do these
Oh.
things into our gut. So that's just another point why I think it's such an important field, to.
Can you use CRISPR technology to be able to make these kinds of modifications to our current microbiomes potentially?
Yeah, I mean, there are different molecular biology techniques, that can do that. So not really rocket science, I mean, it's something that can be done today. And I think the awareness, if you think about how much effort is invested in coming up with more and more regular probiotics, like first generation
Right.
probiotics, which, have probably some benefit in some indications. But the much bigger fish to fry is in the second and third generation, which is on the horizon.
That's fascinating. I've never heard that before about I might have missed it. I don't know if you had it in your book or not, but the
Oh, it
microplastic.
didn't
Yeah, that's
happen.
amazing. Being able to have like a second generation or third generation, bug, or get it from some, crazy animal that is found, miles beneath the sea, and then just put it on our bodies. It's interesting how much our medicine has turned into, instead of fighting things that we've been fighting for a long time, everything is based on fighting the injuries that we are doing to ourselves as humans. I mean, we're exposed to so many things. When I learned about really learned about the microplastics, I had a guy on. He was a medical provider in a couple of administrations in the White House, but he served in the military, and reading about their exposures in the military to burn pits and this and that. Somehow I just stumbled on the microplastic issue and how it can even lodge in mitochondria and create mitochondrial dysfunction, and decrease in ATP, and affect everything. It's just amazing. I just did a post recently about tea bags and how much microplastics you get. Again, another fact that is just not on people's minds. And there's one type, it's billions of parts per milliliter, billions. But yet we ingest this stuff and we don't even know. We just go about our business. It's just normal life. We're enjoying our tea. For those in England or whatever, they're 2 p.m. tea and they're putting the tea bag in. So, it's just interesting. That got so many comments, and it was very interesting to see that on the microplastics. One more housekeeping thing as far as the way that the gut brain axis work, and then I want to get into some like really specific questions about actionable items, because when we have an expert like you, people want to know, okay, that's nice, there's a gut brain axis, but what can I do as a consumer to be healthier and make my life better? And I also want to know as a doctor, how can I help my patients better by focusing on their microbiome? So can you just talk, and you don't have to go into very detailed things about how most of the serotonin is produced in the gut, and then how that eventually translates into the precursor for dopamine that is then in the brain, and how it works with the brain reward axis and all that stuff, just so people understand, like, what's the connection. It's not just the immune it's literally it's the precursors of the neurotransmitters that allow us to process information.
Yeah, and to start this, my answer with is, a lot of the genes that microbes have in evolution were a process called lateral gene transfer, transferred to the first primitive marine animals, and then in evolution. So many of these neurotransmitter-like substances existed long before in the microbes, then were expressed in the gut of these primitive marine animals. And then ultimately, when organisms became polar and developed a head, that some of that information and these neurons and their transmitters, originally from the microbes, made their way into the brain. So that's the reason why there's this common language, between these primitive organisms, the microbes, and the most complicated organ in the universe, the brain. And if you take the example of serotonin, it's a complicated one. I'm going to make this as quick as possible.
That's why I said, it's very complicated. But
so if you look at serotonin in general, the majority is synthesized in these enterochromaffin cells in the gut. These are cells that are sandwiched in between the layers of the gut, the cells that make up the layer of the gut. And they produce them from tryptophan. So tryptophan, essential amino acids, comes from your diet, makes it into these cells. The cells transform them with enzymes into serotonin. And that serotonin is stored in these cells. More than 95% of the body's serotonin is in these cells. The main function appears to be, and that's probably why it's in the gut, is the regulation of proper functioning of the gut itself. So we talked earlier about 150 million nerve cells. These nerve cells get a lot of influence from the serotonin produced in the gut to regulate secretion in the gut, peristalsis, propagation, pain sensation. A small amount of the tryptophan is, or a certain amount of tryptophan is absorbed in the small intestine. So it doesn't get to these cells. It's absorbed rapidly. It's a major nutrient. It's an essential amino acid. We need that for our health. And it gets into the systemic circulation and is taken up by specialized cells, specialized nuclei in the brainstem, called these Raphe nuclei. So these are small regions in the brain, not as big as the serotonin system in the gut. But the unique thing is they have projections, these small nuclei, to almost all other cells in the brain. So they sit in a very important strategic position to modulate the activity of the brain and can regulate anything from pain perception, sleep, appetite, overall well-being. Then a portion at the brain level is also, metabolized into dopamine with the whole, the whole reward system function. But there are these two systems. The ones in the gut, the serotonin in the gut, it's not only involved in gut regulation because nerve endings from the vagus nerve, so this main nerve connecting the brain and the gut, they form synapses, so very close interactions with these serotonin producing cells. So you can almost look at these serotonin producing cells. There are extensions of the brain into the gut where the brain can sense what goes on in terms of serotonin production. So the brain gets two serotonin influences. One is directly from these brainstem nuclei with all their projections, and then the second one is the sensing of the vagus nerve of these serotonin cells and transmitting that information up. So a very complicated system, but obviously playing a key role in these brain-gut interactions and our overall well-being. But it's not as simple that you could just say, well, I'm going to take a tryptophan supplement or increase because to deal with that complexity in the gut, and also some of the metabolites of tryptophan are not healthy. So there's indoles and there's canurines. So these are other metabolites like serotonin, also made from the same precursor, but some of them are actually neuroinflammatory or promote neurodegeneration. So this is a good example where you can compare what's in the social media domain.
Yes.
We have tryptophan, the happiness molecule.
Yes.
We know exactly 95% is in the gut. To the science, it gets more and more complicated. And if you want to do interventions, you can imagine many companies have used to target the serotonin system, for example, for gut disorders, for irritable bowel syndrome. And most of them have not really panned out, so yeah, in psychiatry, it has worked well with these serotonin reuptake inhibitors. It's still the main thrust in antidepressant treatments. But systems like that make it difficult for the pharmaceutical industry to target specifically something without getting the side effects or having totally unexpected results or no results.
And like you said before, that makes perfect sense because there's so many different systems involved in these diseases. It's such a factorial, problem. And that's why a lot of the way that we try to target disease in a non-functional medicine way, because I think functional medicine and integrative medicine is really the way to go, right? It's root cause medicine as opposed to, take this one molecule and it's going to, how does it work like that? If there's 40 molecules involved in disease A, and you give one, reuptake inhibitor or whatever it is, we target everything, right? Every molecule in that chain will be targeted by pharma, but you're not fixing the root cause. Maybe you're diminishing one of the symptoms, but of course you're creating other symptoms because you have, just like you said, like if you take a ton of tryptophan or whatever, there's these other effects. There's just all the, the cause and effects. That was a beautiful explanation, by the way, of the different systems. And I think that's pretty, I don't want to say easy to understand, but at least it gives people a base of how complex these interactions are. But when you say vagus nerve, it's really one of my favorite things because you talk about things that that can make us really well. I've talked a lot, and I've had from psychiatrists to spiritual people to all these people. We talk about how important it is to be in these parasympathetic states because that's where you release the hormones of love and you relax and your body heals and your inflammation goes down. And you talk about that a lot, how important it is. And I'm a huge proponent of meditation and yoga and mantras and breath work. And I try to teach this to my colleagues and to other people. Can you talk about, because I know you've talked about this a lot, this is one of your favorite topics, how important it is, because sometimes it sounds touchy-feely, especially from a spine surgeon. Why is this guy talking about this stuff? But it's so important to get into those very relaxed states. That's when you're in the healing, and it's amazing for the gut and the way the gut works and digestion, and then subsequently the signals that are sent back to the brain. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of that and how it can heal?
Yeah, and I want to start this with, if you look at society, we barely leave room for the majority of people for these totally relaxed states. Most people have never experienced it in their life. For some of us, we're fortunate we can go to these retreats, or we have the time, to meditate or to, but it's certainly one of the most effective ways. I mean, like what I've seen with patients with stress-related gut disorders, deep diaphragmatic breathing or deep abdominal breathing is one of the most effective and simplest way to switch fairly rapidly into one of these relaxed states. And almost everybody can do it. I've had some patients, which was always very interesting, that cannot do it, that are unable to do it, and because their system is so rigidly programmed that they don't have this. But as humans, we have a built-in uh, self-relaxation system, that we've forgotten to activate. Um, you can activate it, or you can probably have the most profound experiences with with meditation, but also with some of these you know these psychedelic experiences where people have like be it ketamine, be it psilocybin.
Mhm.
This also puts the body in this totally relaxed state, and you come out, and even for a couple of days, you say, God, I'm a different person. I feel so incredibly relaxed. Um, so we have this. I've also seen it. I was fortunate. It's also in my book, this story. In during my college times, to be on a film expedition to these indigenous people on the Orinoco River. We lived with them. It was always an experience like living with people on a different planet. And the most amazing thing was to see how well this ability to totally relax of the men who were fearless hunters and warriors. But when they come home, the way they relax in their hammocks for hours and play with their children is a remarkable thing. You won't see fathers in the US spend that kind of relaxed time with their children. So I think our ancestors knew how to do this. This was part of their lives. They did not have this 24/7 schedule of information overload and constantly having to do and to-do lists. I would say the simplest thing individuals that don't that are not card-carrying meditators or um, um, contemplative practitioners is this abdominal breathing, which you can do several times a day for 5-10 minutes, and it has remarkable effects both on your gut health but also on your brain. It's very relaxing. There's other techniques similar, like autogenic training, where you combine it with some musculoskeletal relaxation and feelings of heaviness and warmth. So there's many self-hypnosis. There's many of these techniques that fortunately are becoming more popular amongst certain, I would say, the bi-coastal areas, particularly in the US, but also, this is something definitely making progress and should be, I mean, these techniques should be taught to school children, kindergartners. This is some of the best, the cheapest way of preventing later problems with stress-related disorders that become very expensive. I would say I'm a huge fan of that, and I would include this in any therapy of a chronic disease. It has to be an essential part of it.
Yeah, it's huge, and we do that a lot for our, obviously, seeing all these spine related disorders. I mean, our patients' pain, it's amazing for pain, and a lot of people are actually initially resistant to it, but when they do it, it could make a major, impact in the amount of medications that they need. Potentially, they could even get off of medications over time, depending on, what their actual disease is. I have a question because, and I don't know the answer to this. Has there been studies in the like meditation or getting into these parasympathetic states that actually show a change in the actual microbiome? I don't know. I'm not aware if that specific thing has been studied.
Yeah, there were a couple of papers. They were not the best papers of longtime meditators where they
Mm-hmm.
looked at the gut microbiome. And these are epidemiological or correlational studies. You can't really talk about causation. So if somebody who didn't meditate and then they do it for a while and then it changes the microbiome. But we have done a study, investigators in our center have done a study with mindfulness-based stress reduction training for about 4 weeks in a group setting and looking at the microbiome before and after, and there were changes,
Wow.
so, um, which is not unexpected because if you change the signaling from the brain to, as I say, a more parasympathetic, I mean,
Yes.
that's the general term, but I think it describes complex,
Yes.
system of mechanisms. So we know that stress, the opposite from relaxation, has a significant effect on the microbial composition and function and even gene expression. We don't have the same hard data for the relaxation states, but there's some, like this mindfulness-based stress reduction. It's unpublished results so far, but hopefully we'll get this published soon. Um, and that's always the problem, with NIH-funded studies in general. In the past, they found mainly studies on disease, um, on negative things and how you can fix
Yes.
them. There's some change, with the office of, I forgot what the latest name of that institute is, or this office at the NIH that funds positive biology or positive emotion studies. That's definitely something we need to know a lot more, and I said the most important thing is it needs to be taught. It needs to go out to the
Yes.
public. That's one of the reasons that I've spent a lot of time since writing my books now in the social media domain. Not that I'm a fan of it, because I think there's a lot of crazy stuff going on and it's a lot of negative effects, but certainly it allows to raise the awareness of people, of all, not professionals, so not physicians, but mainly of families, young mothers, before they have their first child, how stress of the mother, for example, can affect
Yeah.
brain development and the microbiome of the infant. So this teaching of that, maybe that's going to be part of the new MAHA program. The
That'd be
education,
great.
yeah, it could easily be. It's um, the pharmaceutical industry won't like that, but it's certainly something that I think should happen.
No, absolutely. It's I got just a couple issues before I get to mine. One is one of the reasons, and I meant to say this before, but one of the things that fascinated me when I started reading about the microbiome is it's so interesting that we share it like culturally within populations, and then we share it also amongst family members, right? You start seeing similarities just by being around people. So where you are in the world, who your family are, what your society's like, it's so interesting. And then I started thinking, well, the way that most of us live our lifestyles here in the United States with processed foods, massive amounts of processed sugars and toxins and all this stuff. I mean, we're just in a bad environment for our microbiome. So it's kind of hard, right, to run away from this stuff. I mean, we could live great, but there is some sharing of
Yes,
microbiome. I think that is fascinating, to me, because that doesn't mean we're taking each other's like fecal pills, right? We're not doing fecal transplants. We're just literally around each other and share in some of these species. Fascinating.
yeah, and there's obviously, humans have intimate contacts both with their children or sexual with their partners. Um, you have to think about this. All these situations uh, promote the dissemination of your microbes with
Yes.
the microbes of others. Um, I mean, the amount of interaction of newborns, for example, with the mother. I mean, it's like, um, but I think it persists throughout life that you have that. There's also something to that, to say something to that. So social interactions or having
Yes.
meals or preparing meals together socially, being in the kitchen together, that's another way of disseminating, microbes. And many of these benefits of the Mediterranean diet, I come to realize this more and more when you look at the actual numbers. It's not necessarily what they eat, but also how they live and how they eat it, in what context, and how they prepare it. If you ever, been involved in an Italian family when they all get together and cook, um, it's a
Absolutely.
social mingling with physical contact and uh, yeah, we've been moving into the opposite direction, obviously, with COVID-19, with the
Right.
um, all the social isolation and the obsession with antimicrobial solutions, and
Yes.
we've declared war on this microbial exchange. Yes, some of these microbes are bad, that are being shared, and it's our cause of disease. But I would dare to say that the majority are actually positive.
Yep.
This.
Yeah, I think we've done it's interesting, that's something that I wasn't necessarily going to talk about, but I think that this obsession with staying away from all microbiome, cleaning up surfaces relentlessly, staying away from other people, this and that. I think it has made an impact on our immune system and how we're able to fend off disease, and that goes through the whole microbiome. And it's not just the microbiome, right, of the gut, right, because the skin has a microbiome.
Yeah.
The bladder involved. It's so fascinating, like just microbiomes, right? Like, I mean, how much research is now being done? Like, for example, women that have interstitial cystitis or bladder stuff. I mean, they're miserable, but their microbiomes are different than people that don't. It's just fascinating to know, and I think there's going to be so many changes. But what do you really? I mean, that's an important takeaway. I think that we need to be exposed. So, for example, I would caution, and again, this is your area of expertise, not mine, but I would imagine if we put ourselves in a bubble for 2 years and just were a bubble, we were exposed to nothing, and then we came out, we would get so ill immediately.
Absolutely.
So the question is, like, for example, we're having, sorry, I'm trying to connect the dots, but like right now, if you think about it, we're calling it the quaddemic, right? There's 4 different viral situations that are going on all at the same time, and our emergency rooms are overwhelmed again. Is it maybe because we damaged our immune systems by avoiding contact and just basically cleaning everything?
No, absolutely. And, the biggest damage is done early in life. Clearly, like, the way, I mean, coming back to my jungle experience, the Yanomami were, I mean, I always tell the story, also put it in my book, when I woke up one night and a full moon, and I saw this woman squatting in the middle of this town center and delivering her baby on a banana leaf. There was nobody else around. It was right into the dirt, where dogs had played before and pet animals had played. That's certainly something that we have eliminated. If you look at how the majority of babies are born today in a sterile delivery room, the mothers are giving antibiotics to prevent staph infection, post-delivery staph infections. So we declare war on the development of the development of a healthy, intelligent immune system from early on, because we take away the teachers, like the microbes that are beneficial in stimulating the immune system, but that they're not dangerous enough to kill us. So there's even H. pylori is one of these,
Yes.
TB, another one of these. We have declared war on these, and at the cost of increasing autoimmune diseases, allergies,
Mm-hmm.
but also the greater vulnerability to many of these viral diseases. So during the pandemic, there was all these, again, on social media, efforts to boost the immune system.
Yes.
Well, people didn't understand the overactive immune system was one of the biggest problems with
Yes.
an epidemic. That it's the dysregulation of that system, and that the immune cells that have not gone through the regular teaching through the environment, microbes in the environment, and microbes in their gut, who have not gone, immune systems have not gone through this training, are not as competent later in life to respond in the proper way. And you'll continue to see the rise in autoimmune diseases and allergies. Peanut allergies, when I went to medical school, didn't exist. Now everybody talks about it.
Everybody. I mean, this has really been fascinating. I just want to get into some really actionable stuff that people can take, including myself as a physician. So I got a couple like really specific things. Number one, as a physician, but also as a personal consumer myself, and now that in the integrative health space and this and that, is it your thing? And I know you're doing some great work with Viome, that company. We could talk about that a little bit, but more importantly, as part of a comprehensive evaluation of people's health and wellness, should I, as a physician, and should people as consumers, or myself as a consumer, should everybody look at getting testing of their microbiome? And I know there's different ways to do it, and Viome does it, they have some proprietary technology they do a little bit different. But is this something, because the more I'm going down the path of integrative health, the more I'm thinking to myself, yes, we really need a comprehensive analysis of people so that at least you can get some ideas of what's the problem, what's the root cause. So do you think that every American should have their microbiomes tested and just to see how it's contributing just to their general wellness and or autoimmune disorders or their dementia, whatever they've got going on?
So I would say, as you alluded to, not all these tests are equal in quality and interpretation and recommendations you get. I think in this field of research and science is still evolving. I think we have now techniques where you can not just measure who is there, but what they do. I mean, like the genes that are being expressed, which is superior. Like in the science field, you don't go with the simple so-called 16S sequencing techniques just to know who's there, not even on the
Right.
on the strain level, not even on the species level, but on a very coarse level. I would say that those techniques are not really helpful. If then you limit it to a very small number of companies or products that actually have these newer techniques, and there's differences in quality. I think what is not evolved at the same speed as doing the analyses is the interpretation and the recommendations.
Yes.
I have tried many of these tests, and I've not really gotten any recommendation back. I was always curious, what would they
Of course.
tell? No, I feel I'm healthy. I'm a stressed individual, but I also do a lot of healthy things, meditation. And so the kind of recommendations that I got were completely useless, and I talked to friends. So somebody said the test results told them, stay away from blueberries. They're toxic for you. Ridiculous. Stay away from nightshades, like all these. So this is the big problem with these tests right now, that the majority will not make really evidence-based recommendations, particularly if these companies are bundled with supplement
Oh,
makers. And then
absolutely.
there's a few exceptions. I mean, I'm on the advisory board and I worked with a few of them. So Jonah is one, Tiny Health is one. I stopped my interactions with Viome, so I'm not
Okay.
somebody talking about them at all. But I think there's progress. I think right now to recommend this to everybody is probably not necessary.
Mm.
I would say somebody's undergone antibiotic therapy
Mhm.
and all of a sudden doesn't feel well or has
Yes.
gotten health issues. That person should definitely go through it. And I think the recommendations I would keep much more, much more general. So, for example, if it comes out that your alpha diversity is decreased, compromised, or certain microbes are decreased in their abundance, I think there's very simple things like, again, going back to functional medicine, naturally fermented products,
Mm.
a whole variety of them, each of which has different organisms in them. It's probably the best, and this is what I recommend at the moment. So not going with the specific results of one or two microbes are being decreased,
Mm.
the two are increased. I have more this holistic approach. Okay, let's go to a diet that is rich in natural fermented foods and that is rich in different types of fiber. So it's not just to take, some fiber containing vegetable
Yeah.
3 times a day. It's going to the market and picking out different types of vegetables and fruits and salads and mixing those. There are studies that have shown that you need to eat about 30 different types of plant-based foods a
Mhm.
week to change the diversity and the health of your gut microbiome. So I would say if somebody's concerned, had the antibiotic treatment, didn't return back to the same health feeling, gut health feeling, well-being, that person would probably be well advised to do one of these tests and then not really listen to the recommendations from their company, but say, I'm going to build this up in the natural way. Yeah, I haven't seen any evidence that would change my view on this, that, and it's similar for a situation like C. difficile colitis, one of the worst
Right.
things.
Yes.
The normal gut microbiome has been pretty much wiped out, and let's say you had a fecal transplant, which is a very effective treatment for that.
Yes. Yep.
Then to build it up further and to reconstitute your own microbiome, I think doing the same two things, the diversified fermented diet and the diversified plant-based food, is probably the best way to do it.
And I think, honestly, I absolutely love your answer. And that is so important because, listen, you're one of the world's foremost experts on this stuff. And that's a great actionable thing, because that's something that I struggle with, because you could read this paper or that paper and then, maybe I'll do this, maybe I'll do that. But I agree 100%, starting with the yogurt and the kefir and the different types of vegetables and mixing things. One other question, I want to get into the diet, question, but how about people? So IBS, right? Irritable bowel syndrome. It's something that, our constant, right? If you think about IBS-C, we see all the commercials on TV. Don't get me started about commercials, pharmaceutical commercials on television. Those should be banned this millisecond. Why are we practicing medicine on television? I still don't understand. But if you think about the amount of constipation medication that is sold in our country, it is like number one, right? Like those things fly off the shelf. Everybody's constipated. Now, not everybody, but many, many people are constipated. So they're taking all these anti-constipation medications. Would it be maybe in that subset of people that are really struggling with constipation and are taking whatever they're taking, those things can have all kinds of detrimental effects, not to mention you can get sort of hooked on them, because then if you come off, then then you have to go get disimpacted at the emergency room, because you're never going to go. But maybe in those IBS-C type patients or just general constipation, could those tests potentially help in that setting, or we just do the natural things and see how that works for them?
Yeah, I personally, as a physician, you always get like refractory patients that didn't respond to anything. Yeah, you may want to do it in a patient like that, But there's also the negative side to it, with like the whole SIBO thing,
Yes. Yep.
which is not an entity. It's certainly not a disease. It's a finding on a test.
Right.
The symptoms can be caused, non-specific, can be caused by a variety of other, by IBS and things. But to use, for example, the hydrogen breath test as a reason then to go on an antibiotic treatment is another example, I think, which is not something that I would recommend to. I've actually never recommended it to anybody.
Oh, interesting.
And I've seen a lot of patients that have come to me from being treated for SIBO with antibiotics, had a positive test, got temporarily better, and then the symptoms came back. Some have gone through 6 repeated treatments with antibiotics, which I'm sure damaged in a major way there. Now, some people say, that the rifaximin, the antibiotic that's used to treat SIBO, does not have a negative effect on the gut microbiome. I don't believe that. I think every antibiotic has a negative effect. But I don't think in this class of patients, the way I deal with patients in this category is actually with plant-based remedies, which I find. So I think there's a big there's a big myth in gastroenterology that treatment with certain plant-based treatments for constipation damage the gut, and that once you're on them, you can't get off them. There's a strange thing about constipation that in many patients you have a temporary beneficial impact on their symptoms, but then the symptoms come back. So they take one medication and the constipation Then they come 2 months later. Now the constipation is back, even though I've been taking this. It's almost if the body or the gut wants to await these interventions to change that slow transit. I don't know what that is, or if it's some kind of a dependency on treatment of so I often thought about it's almost like an addiction to something that stimulates their intestine. But so the way that I do it is, with a sort of a simple remedy of rhubarb root extracts, which has molecules in it, and there's actually studies. There's an interesting website put up by the German government on these natural remedies with all the evidence that supports or is against. And so I've looked at this rhubarb literature for a while, and it's really interesting that depending on the depths in the rhubarb root, there's different combinations of molecules that stimulate propulsion and that inhibit propulsion, sort of like this yin and yang phenomenon. And I've seen this practically that in the majority of patients that had resistant constipation, that this was the most effective treatment. Kind of surprising, that it's not as popular as taking pills or laxatives, but there's definitely also, just like in other areas of like functional medicine, there's remedies that are not that haven't been adopted by mainstream medicine, which are effective and cheaper and have fewer side effects.
So the next thing is, this is a perfect segue after talking about rhubarb and this and that, into diets, what we can recommend. And I know you've already mentioned the plant-based diet. And I said to you before, before we started the show, you had one of my favorite people actually, wrote a nice thing, to start off your book. He's the first guy, Joel Fuhrman. And he is a massive proponent of the nutritarian diet. And like I told you, when I mentioned when I said carnivore diet, I thought he almost fell off of his chair and went on this great rant about, oh my God, that's not longevity, all this stuff. And he's like, this is what you have to do. And to be honest with you, I personally, when I was younger, really got into the dieting space personally with carnivore and keto diets, which were amazing because I was able to really, shed weight and I was feeling great and this and that. And then I slowly transitioned into more of a paleo diet, and then slowly transitioned more into intermittent fasting with trying to do whole foods. But more recently, by talking, to guys like, Dr. Katz, who talks about, he does the U.S. News and World Report stuff, pretty well-known guy, and Dr. Fuhrman, I've definitely started incorporating a lot more of the like really trying to get a lot more, of the, and I think actually Dr. Katz said it best. He's like, mostly plants, some other stuff, nuts and seeds, but everything in moderation. He said, if you do that, that's all you need to know. He's like, there's all these, nutritarian, pescatarian, blah, blah, blah. There's all these things out there, and flexitarian, all these different diets. As far as microbiome diversity, I know you've talked about how, the plant-based diets, you're going to have more diverse, but you're not necessarily against the carnivore diet, or are you? Because I know that there's a more recent, thing that you co-authored. Like, what would you say? Just put your microbiome hat on, your gastroenterology microbiome hat on. When it comes to dieting, is it better for people just to be on a diet that works for them? Or should we really be leaning people towards the plant-based type diets, because those have clearly been shown to be best for longevity and cardiovascular health? Like, how do we, it's such a controversial topic. If I posted this right now on social media, people go crazy about this stuff.
Yeah, I would say, the answer is fairly simple. I think if you're concerned about longevity and overall health, I think a largely plant-based, and I always this interchangeably Mediterranean style or largely plant-based, because there's other Asian versions of the largely plant-based diet, should be considered the human default diet. The paleo diet, I think, is a misinterpretation, Because even coming back to these indigenous people on the Orinoco River, they're surrounded by wild animals, by birds, fish, mammals, but they only eat a small amount of them. Most of their food comes from tubers and berries and fruits, and so nobody tells them that. There's no book that tells them that. This is
They just eat.
this is a culture in these people, and they if they don't get killed or bitten by a snake, killed in warfare, which they always are involved in, they live into their 80s, without any medications. Once they contact the Western
Mhm.
missionaries that go in there, they become dependent on Western food supplies, and they're all sick. They lose their health. So this is a good example of a spontaneously selected diet that people have done over thousands of years. They've done this for thousands of years, living there in this environment, which has helped the environment. So they didn't eradicate all the animals in their vicinity, and they didn't destroy, the landscape or pollute the water, and they stay healthy, largely. So I think this question that you ask depends a lot of what we want. What if you want longevity and if you want general health of your body? I think there's no question that the evidence supports a largely plant-based diet. Largely means 75%. The rest could come from poultry or fish. If a small amount of this comes from beef or from meat um, then it depends on how this meat is produced.
Yes.
If it's produced of um, deplorable cows that are fed food that makes them sick, and then they get antibiotics to keep them alive, and um, then obviously you want to eliminate this completely. And the same thing applies to poultry. You don't want to eat poultry of
Yeah.
chicken that are raised with antibiotics. But in general, this recommendation, I think, stands, and you can defend this against any attacks by keto defenders or paleo defenders. Now, there's a few situations. If you want to lose weight quickly, so now we have Ozempic, so it's no longer, but people have shown and their studies you can lose weight quickly on a keto diet, much faster than on any of the other diets. If you're a um, if you're an athlete mainly concerned with building muscle and you want most of your nutrition coming from protein, and by the way, it doesn't have to come from animal protein.
Right.
You may gravitate towards that diet as well. Generally, younger people prefer
Yes.
that, particularly males. It sort of goes with this whole myth about, a real male has to eat uh, red meat. Uh, there's also a category of a very small number of people of children that have refractory um, epilepsy, which does not respond to medication or anything else. So they have been shown to benefit from a keto diet, and that is
Yes.
actually been studied in animal models. Is mediated by the beneficial effect of microbes that produce more GABA, this inhibitory neurotransmitter that suppresses the threshold for seizures. Um, if you don't fall into these categories, I personally don't see um, reason to go back to a pure carnivore diet or a keto diet. In the long term, there's more things that speak against it than that speak for it, including the environmental impact. And people always forget, we're very selfish when we talk about diets, but I mean the impact it has on the environment. I mean, with these cows, I've seen it in Brazil, how the or in Central America, where the forest is cut down to make room for
Yeah.
McDonald's, the supply chain for McDonald's hamburger. It's we don't see these things, but they do happen in a big way. So I think if you're thinking about the best diet, you should always think about not just for you, but for the world and for your descendants, who want to have a similar world, beneficial world around than as you do. Um, yeah, I think this is pretty much my answer. So I'm not religious about this. There's some people that are very religious about this, like particularly vegans. Have made it a religion,
Yes.
and that I think is counter the evidence because the vegan diet in comparisons is not as beneficial as a pruned, largely plant-based diet with
Mhm.
fish and some animal proteins in it. So yeah, I'm not a promoter of vegan diet. I also find I asked a couple of people to write a blurb for my second book
Yes.
about this, and they refused it because I had an example in there about chicken, and that I think goes too far for me.
Well, you got, I mean, Furman's on there, and I mean, his is a little different. It's very, very nutrient dense, but it's very vegan. He's a great guy. It's interesting. Before we get into the GLP ones, and I promise we're getting closer. I got just a couple more things for it, but it's just this fascinating discussion. I mean, I could go for 5 hours on this. This stuff is very interesting. It's interesting that if you look at like dementia, Alzheimer's disease, there was some landmark, paper recently came out about the vegan diet in combination with some other things improving. But there's also evidence that the carnivore keto kind of based diets can also help in some of these psychiatric disorders. So I think that your recommendation, I agree with it 100%. And I'm definitely starting to lean in that direction because the evidence is there. I mean, there's so much evidence with these at least primarily plant-based diets. But it's interesting that you can like eat like vegan and then some of the carnivore, sometimes they can help the same mental health disorders. And it's interesting how some people are going this way and some people are going the other way. It's just fascinating what we're finding out about the connection,
Yeah,
between
and I would
those
say
two
the one
things.
comment to that, and as a scientist, I'm always open to whatever I think at the moment to give that up if there's enough evidence for the opposite. Um, it depends on the stage of the disease. So it's the same thing with inflammatory bowel disease. Now after years of totally neglecting diet as an important factor for ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease, the recommendations now of the professional societies is for a Mediterranean diet
Mm-hmm.
um, in the quiet state of these diseases. So if you're in remission, induced either pharmacologically or by other means, then the best way to prevent the recurrence seems to be these largely plant-based diets, Mediterranean style diets. If you're in a flare, like in Crohn's disease, a elemental diet, which takes out all the fibers and everything,
Mm-hmm.
a keto diet may be beneficial. And the same thing is true. The same thing is true about cognitive decline, early on to prevent in a high risk patient, for example, who has a strong family history and a genetics, the ApoE gene for Alzheimer's disease, to delay the onset. I think the plant-based diet is definitely the best way to do it. Once you have the full-blown Alzheimer's disease, there are studies that
Yes.
suggest that a keto diet is actually beneficial. And always keep in mind, what the keto diet, what it does, it's at least if you believe that same thing happens as in animals, it increases the GABA production or the GABA delivery to the brain. That may be the underlying reason why in certain conditions that is better if you but it doesn't mean that I would recommend for people to treat or prevent cognitive decline to go on a keto diet. I think this would be totally
Oh,
and so this is where I think science comes in and evidence comes in that you don't make these global assessments and recommendations. You say, okay, this study was done in this population and it benefited
right.
a different population of the same disease. It has a negative effect. I think that's really
And that's why, I mean, honestly, that answer you just gave for that is why, it hits on your point that you made before, why it's so important when people are going to make decisions about their own health and the direction they want to go in. That's why they have to rely on experts because the nuances and all the little things like in this stage you do this, in this stage you do that, as opposed to some of these influencers who just because grandma got a good result with one thing, then everyone needs to be on that, and that's going to cure the whole world. And take this supplement and that supplement. It's nuanced, and that's why people really need to go to experts when they have serious problems to get really those nuanced answers like you gave. Couple more things. GLP-1s everywhere. They're putting it in the can. I mean, I'm surprised. They're going to put it in the water everywhere. Everyone's on GLP-1s these days. What are you seeing as far as the effect of GLP-1s on the microbiome and health? Because it affects it has multiple areas it affects, right? It affects the brain, but the effect that it has on directly on the intestines. Are we seeing a connection between being on GLP-1s and microbiome diversity? Is it changing things? I think that's really a fascinating question.
Yeah, there's a small number of studies. I don't even know if it's more than 2 or 3 that have shown that GLP-1s have a positive effect on the gut microbial health. I don't remember. I would have to pull this out. Was this done at a stage where that person had already lost 20 or 25 pounds and no longer wasn't the state of metabolic syndrome? Or was this actually the pharmacological effect of these GLP-1s? It's a very interesting class of drugs. When I started my career long time ago, feel embarrassed to even say how long, but so we did studies on one of these molecules. This was a time when these gut hormones were first discovered. Very exciting time. I was fascinated from the beginning in this and did a research paper with my mentor at the time on one of these molecules, which at the time was called gastroinhibitory peptide, is GIP, which is one component of forgot now which one of these anti-obesity drugs it's part of, but it seems to be this GLP-1 agonist and GLP-1 agonist have some kind of a synergistic effect when given together. So so I've had an interest in these molecules for a long time, and at the time, we characterized like the GLP-1 agonist had inhibited gastric emptying. That was one thing. It probably did a lot of other things as well, which we didn't look at the time. And this is the same thing with the GLP-1s. There may be a couple of studies on beneficial effects on the gut microbiome, but then it has effects on the brain, on the hypothalamus, on cells in the gut. And there's just a paper, I just put it in my to-read box. I haven't read it yet, but a paper came out from the VA system, from I think several 100,000 people that they looked at that had that were on GLP-1s, and there were benefits on a range of diseases, from certainly cognitive decline, obesity-related metabolic syndrome. So these are compounds that don't just do what to change your appetite. They do a lot more. And keep in mind the doses that they're given in are multifold higher than the ones the body produces. So these are not physiological effects. I don't think we really know, so at least it's not in the public domain, what they all do. I'm sure the companies know a lot more about these compounds, which they won't publicize at the moment. But I think it's setting off a revolution and could potentially set off a revolution in our general health. If it's cheaper that everybody takes these and prevents bypass operations and lifelong insulin treatment and all these things, then it may be a good thing that it's happening, without the side effects. We don't know yet if after 10 years all these people develop cancer, but it's certainly one of the most exciting things that is happening. I've never seen anything like this before with a drug development. Almost too good to be true, quite honestly.
That's the problem. Is it too good to be true?
And the thing that the downside is it gets people off the hook so they can continue their unhealthy lifestyles.
Bingo.
I'm just going to take this pill. I can eat whatever I want. I don't have to go to the gym, This is one of the biggest dangers.
But you're still doing the damage. I mean, if you're still taking in all those toxic, all those toxic chemicals that are in our food and things like that. So you're right. It's interesting. I had Dr. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but Dr. Kenneth Bloom, he's the guy that discovered the allele for alcoholism. He's just like this famous neuropharmacologist. I had him on my program. It was just fascinating. One of his concerns with the GLP-1s, and again, I think they're definitely indicated in a subset of people. I'm not anti-GLP-1. I judicious use of anything, but he's concerned because it has direct effects on the pleasure reward center. And that's all of his studies. And he's actually written to the NIH and all these other people, warning them about potential long-term consequences of the effects of the GLP-1s on the brain, especially on younger, because they're trying to get it approved down to, like a year old, like that kind of stuff. So it'll really be interesting, to see. All right. Two very quick last questions. Vaccine. COVID mRNA, the mRNA vaccine. Now, more and more is coming out. I try not to be controversial at all on my show. I'm not a vaccine expert or any of this other stuff, but there is some evidence. I looked at a couple of the papers. There's some evidence that you do get a change. It might be temporary, but there is a change in the microbiome. Is this something that you're concerned about? Like what may how that particular vaccine might affect the microbiome? And have you read anything where it's really because there's a patient that I saw for another reason, but he talked about the fact, and his doctor is convinced that because of the vaccine, it actually gave him a syndrome where it killed his entire microbiome. And he ended up having a fecal transplant. And the doctor, believe it or not, some doctor in Utah attributed it to the vaccine. And again, I know this stuff is controversial and I don't claim to be an expert, and this is certainly not medical advice. What's your thoughts on that? Do you have any thoughts on that in the microbiome?
Well, I think if you compare, there may be, there's always atypical side effects to any medication. It's particularly if you intervene so pretty heavily in the genetics of a cell. It's not surprising that there's. But if you look at the positive side, that millions of lives were saved because of the vaccine and will be saved in the future with these type of vaccines, where they, now working on cancer indications.
Yes.
And the next pandemic will be coming 100% certainty, so to have something that works will be very helpful, even though it's going to be hard to implement this in the current climate of discussions. I would even think look at the other way around. The microbiome will have some influence on the effectiveness of vaccinations, just as it has influence on the treatment with immunotherapies for melanoma, or where it's been shown that there's a fairly big effect on predicting the effectiveness of the therapy, these new therapies for melanoma, based on your microbial composition for the treatment. So there's definitely an interaction between the two, and there has been. This has less to do with the vaccination, but I would say, to answer your question, I'm also not an expert on vaccines. I try to stay out of this, except for emphasizing, the vast benefits that have come from this. And there's obviously a lot of myths that have come out of that kind of discussion with autism spectrum, which were refuted 100%. So I think this is an area, before you make any claims, you have to be very careful not to make the same mistakes, and.
Well, that's why when I started off the question, I said, I'm not an expert. I'm just curious to know whether or not, because I know there are a couple of papers out there. I looked at a couple. I mean, they're very small, but they talk about changes in the microbiome with the mRNA. I got last one, I promise you, because you've entertained us for quite a long. This is amazing. This is fascinating. I wish this was 2 more hours. One of the things that I have become like just such a huge fan of as a physician and I'm collaborating with people all over the country and doing this, is using photobiomodulation or light therapies for various things. And so, for example, I had Dr. Paolo Casano, who is the head of the light lab at Massachusetts General Hospital, part of Harvard. He's a psychiatry professor, and they're using light therapy for all kinds of psychiatric disorders and things like that. What's really fascinating is we're using it in our wellness centers, integrative health clinic, but there are papers that show that you improve the diversity of your bacteria by directing light therapy directly to the abdomen, to the intestines, and by using like what we use for people that have ailments, like say they have IBS or something like that. We actually use laser, class 4 laser, so it penetrates deeply. I mean, that'll get down. I mean, that's shining light on all those, on all the bacteria in there, but more importantly on the mitochondria of just all the different systems, all the different cells. Do you have any thoughts on light therapy? Because I think combining, I'm very interested in thinking about, for example, if somebody has dysbiosis or whatever you want to, whatever they're diagnosed with, combining light therapy to the belly with some of the natural remedies as just a good, 1 + 1 might equal 5 in a case like that.
Does this? So I'm not an expert on that either, on this topic, but just thinking about it, and if you could answer that question, does that involve any temperature change to put the light on? Is it a warming light or is it a cold light?
The articles that were out there, that was LED, so it's not warming at all. But the laser will be warming, and just I've become an expert. I'm actually giving a TED talk at Harvard here in April on light therapies and how it's going to change the face of medicine, because for chronic disease and all these other things. But it does absolutely 100% science influence the mitochondria and its production of ATP. So it's interesting, how does it interact? I have no idea. I don't know. It hasn't been studied to that level, but how does it interact directly with the microbiome? Or is there some other mechanism that's creating more diversity by shining a light on that area? It's there's so much we don't know, like we talked about before. And I just want to know, I'm trying to learn. I want to know as much as I can, which is why I love talking to somebody like yourself.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that I can think about is, that's why I asked this question about the temperature, with this, this autogenic training, for example, where you focus on your abdomen and warming the abdomen. You actually learn to do that, to cause vasodilatation in your abdominal area and your heart area. And it's a tremendously pleasant feeling and relaxing feeling to warm your abdomen. And I wouldn't be surprised, I mean, nobody studied this, if vagal activation plays an important role in this.
Interesting.
Now, I have no idea if light would.
The 3 big things that happen that outside of some of the other stuff is we talked about it is absorbed in the mitochondria, and so it helps to produce ATP. Cytochrome C oxidase absorbs it, and then it's just the same as photosynthesis. It's just we absorb different frequencies, and then you do get significant vasodilation, significant, and so you show that in the brain. So when you treat the brain, you can get a functional MRI afterwards. That thing is just lights up because of all this thing. So it's being studied for cognitive decline, and that's what they're doing at that Harvard lab. And we do a lot of this stuff in our integrative health clinics for concussion and all kinds of stuff. But the other thing is it also improves lymphatic flow. And it's pretty interesting in the brain or anywhere else. From a pain management standpoint, we use the laser a lot for pain. It blocks substance P and things like that. So you get an immediate, so if somebody has pain anywhere and you treat them with class 4 laser, usually their pain is better right away because you're blocking the uptake of substance P into their nerves. So it's fascinating, but I'm going to send you a couple of articles on it. I'm just curious to see what you think about it, because light therapy, it's becoming much more mainstream. I just learned about it, a couple of years ago. And now I'm out here, giving lectures on this stuff because it's amazing what can be done with these light therapies.
Yeah, no, I would turn the question around if you at some point, I find that also fascinating. And any of these, if there's evidence for its effectiveness, and if the research is done by credible people, I find it always fascinating. And yeah, so my question is, would you be interested in doing a podcast with me on that, where I ask you the question about light therapy?
100%. You got me. Let's do it.
Okay.
I'm excited. That's great. Now look at that. See, look what comes out of it. And it's my favorite topic. Love light therapy. Yeah, I mean, I think that the potential for so many different things. Like for example, just this is a complete aside from the microbiome, but it's very interesting because once we got into a lot of the red light treatments for all kinds of conditions, we started saying, oh, what else can we do? And so green light therapy is fascinating. I think you'll be fascinated by this. So the University of Arizona studied it for fibromyalgia and for migraines with really good results. And now they have a grant and they're doing a joint project with the US Army to study green light to decrease pain post-operatively. It's amazing for pain. The way it works is the rods and cones in our eyes, they absorb the green light, and then through this complicated mechanism, they release our own enkephalins, our own body's endorphins,
Fascinating.
and it's fascinating, and we can do it. And again, I'm an orthopedic spine surgeon, and we don't learn this stuff in med school. We just don't. This
No,
is
no, you
not
don't.
stuff that, and when you start learning about these things and you see the results real life in patients, it's unbelievable, the results. I could tell you, we have people coming into the clinic with severe migraines. They're in a migraine crisis at the moment, even nausea, vomiting, that kind of stuff. They get in the green light bed, and then we do transcranial red light. Some of them, I'm not kidding, they come in with 9 out of 10 pain, they walk out with one. It's the most
Really?
it's the most fascinating thing, and this is one of the stuff. This is what they're working on at the Harvard lab. It's really really fascinating, and I think I'm going on. I think I'm going to do some case presentations for Massachusetts General Hospital. I just got invited to do that, so I'm really excited about some of the work that's being done on that. And I could tell you, 3 years ago, you would have told me I was doing this stuff. I said, "What? It's insane." But once you start opening up
Oh yeah,
our
yeah.
minds, it's just like microbiome. I'm telling you, I spend a lot of time in Arizona because we live in Phoenix. I mean, we live in Minnesota, so you got to get out to somewhere warm. Otherwise, we kind of lose our minds. But I remember an entire weekend just reading microbiome. That's it. I was out in the sun just reading about the microbiome, reading your book, reading some other text that I bought on Amazon. I'm like, this is amazing. What is the possibility for this stuff? And hopefully AI helps us to clarify and look at all these massive data sets and put it all together and discover things we never knew about the microbiome, and obviously really advance and accelerate this field.
Funny, your comment about the green light benefits, makes me understand. So we have a tenant in a guest house, always has the green light on, and I was I was always wondering why would he turn
Well,
the
I mean, it has to be specific. It'd be interesting. You should ask them. You should ask them what's with this green light. Maybe they've read this. Maybe they read the studies from the
yeah,
University of
yeah.
Arizona, but if they haven't, now you can point them. Anyway, listen, you have been so generous with your time with us today. This has just been a tour de force. I look forward on coming on a podcast with you, and we could talk light therapy. Be prepared. I mean, I could go for hours on that stuff if you want, if
Great,
if,
great.
if you want to do it. But thank you. This has been amazing. I mean, I've learned so much from this. Even reading your books, I learned so much just from our time together today. And I'm sure the audience is just delighted listening to this, and hopefully they get to the end, because it just, I mean, we just kept getting deeper and deeper into that world. Can you let people know where they can find you if they want to learn everything about Dr. Mayer and what you're doing, and where they can get your books and all that kind of stuff?
So probably the simplest way is to go to my website, emeranmayer.com, and we will launch a new version of that website in a couple of weeks. So and that has all the information on it, signing up for the newsletter, for the podcasts, for the courses. It really has all the information on it. I would say that's the simplest way that they could connect. I would highly recommend, to use that resource. On the podcast, yeah, I love my own podcast because I get to talk to really smart people. It's one of the most entertaining activities that I
Love it.
have. And I think a lot of people will benefit from that information. And in our newsletter, we feature new topics in science. It's a combination. I always write one more on the scientific side, and then the co-writers write more on the practical side.
Mhm.
But yeah, I would highly recommend to your listeners to go to the website and
Yeah, I would say absolutely. Your newsletter is amazing. The books are it's a must for people. And the mind gut immune connection, that one is so and that's your more recent one on that, but it is just so digestible, even for the average person that just wants to learn what's this microbiome deal all about. And you're so honest. You're not trying to sell anybody anything. Just a wonderful discussion with you today. So thank you so much for coming on. I look forward to being on your podcast talking about the light therapy, and hope to have you back on our show in the future, because there are things that I'd love to cover.
happy to do it. I really enjoyed it as well. Yeah, it
Yeah,
was
this is wonderful. So thanks everybody for being on another episode of Wellness at the Speed of Light. Dr. Emeran Mayer, it's been incredible. We'll see you next time. Take care of your microbiomes. Be the CEOs of your own health. See you next time.